portions, a process to address and correct the supercharged budgetary performance in the state of California in 2021 and 2022. The need to right-size expenditures, the need to right-size in relationship those expenditures to revenue is self-evident as it relates to some of the projected shortfalls that we announced in January, and we will be updating here today in May. Fundamentally, the approach we will be taking today is a little bit different than the approach we've taken in the past. We are not looking at the budget year alone. We're looking at the budget year plus one. We're looking at the next 2 years to take operating deficits and to have what I loosely refer to as operating reserves, operating surpluses over the next 2 years. We'll lay out today in some detail how we propose to do that with the humility and understanding always that this is a proposal and this is a process that will unfold over the course of the next many weeks, working with legislative leaders, working with groups large and small, and being attuned to the mood of the public and where people are in relationship to some of these proposals. It goes without saying, and you'll ask me, I'm sure, in the Q&A, why this cut. I will undoubtedly say I prefer not to make this cut. These are programs. These are propositions that I've long advanced, many of them. These are things that I've supported. These are things we work closely with the legislature to advance. None of this is kind of work you enjoy doing, but you got to do it. We have to be responsible. We have to be accountable. We have to balance the budget. And so we are submitting today a balanced budget. But we're doing so mindful of the world we're living in. And I remind you every year, as I think previous governors have, of the volatility that is the tax system. And yes, you'll ask the same question we get asked every year. Shall we or should we reform the tax system? The answer is yes. How we do that is a more difficult and challenging conversation, and the volatility is foundational in terms of the tax system we have, the progressive tax system we have today. It's been our friend. You can see those spikes going back to 2000 on the left to just a few years ago, 2021, on at least the right of the screen that I'm looking at. And just to put it in perspective, we talk about this chart as an EKG chart. It's a revenue chart that relates to capital gains. It's the volatility as capital gains as a percentage of our income tax receipts. And to put it in perspective, on the far left there, you'll see in that 2000 peak, it was roughly about 10.4% of our capital gains that were realized as percent of revenue that year. It spiked to 11.6% in that higher spike on the right in 2021. That represented $349 billion of capital gains realized, $349 billion of capital gains realized. Last year, 2023, down to $137 billion, 350-ish to 137, and that's that drop. But here's the long-winded story of this chart. You can see it's back to some normalization. What I mean by normalization, again, a period of distortions and corrections on the basis of the supercharged budgetary performance. We're going back now to more historic norms. And I mean historic in this context. The average over the course of the last many decades has been about 5.18% capital gains. We're slightly below that in the budget year. We project to be slightly above or roughly at that in budget year plus 1 and 2. And that's the line trailing off to the right. But here's the January number that you're familiar with. This is the number we put forward, $37.9 billion problem statement. In January, we were very clear that there was a lot of volatility, a lot of questions as it relates to tax collections. Those tax collections came in November. Numbers came in December, January, February, and March, about $5.8 billion lower than we projected. There was some dust that settled after the tax collections in April, and we'll get to more specific details here in a moment. But I want to remind you, a few moments ago, meaning a few weeks back, we moved quickly with the legislature to address $17.3 billion of the problem statement, to address the issue of the deficit by moving in concert with an early action. I want to applaud the budget chairs. I want to applaud legislative leaders for their support and their recognition of the importance of actively managing the budget, not waiting to described or predetermined dates on the calendar, but to actively manage in real time the challenges. And we did that, you could see, through a series of very familiar solutions: revenue and borrowing, delays, deferrals, issues around reductions, and shifts, things we'll be talking a little bit more about today. As it relates to a bit of that preview, I mentioned the $5.8 billion through March. You extend that and you look across the spectrum of costs and revenue. The problem statement now has increased by additional $7 billion from the January budget. So today we're submitting a $288.1 billion balanced budget, $201 billion general fund, with an additional shortfall that we'll have to manage of $7 billion. So a reminder, $27.6 billion shortfall total now. And I say reminder because we, in January, announced a $37.9 billion shortfall. We took that early action of $17.3 billion. We have an increased challenge of $7 billion, and it nets out to what we have to solve for today, $27.6 billion budget challenge. So let's get into this. How do we address, again, from a multi-year prism, this problem? Not just a short-term strategy, but to get us back to right size, to address that remarkable volatility. And forgive me, you've heard this on so many occasions. When I say remarkable volatility, when I use the word supercharged, those are expressive words, but it's expressed by the reality: $177.7 billion two-year operating surplus, simply unprecedented in U.S. history, let alone California history at a subnational level, that is, at a state level, followed by the dust settling and these shortfalls. So here we are today, and we are facing a $27.6 billion challenge. Next year, to my point about a multi-year strategy, we project a $28 billion shortfall. It's, I think, appropriate and prudent for us not just to solve for this year, but to also solve for next year. And that's the proposal we're laying out, and we are providing and offering the legislature for consideration. If we move forward with the recommendations set forth to address this structural issue, we would enjoy additional $3.4 billion in surplus, a $650 million surplus in budget year plus one. So again, moving from 2 years of deficits to 2 years of operating surplus is what we're recommending the legislature seek. Why are we confident we can achieve this? Because it's solvable. We've done it before. And this is just a reminder of the totality of challenges in the past, again, on the basis of the volatility of our tax structure. The benefits of a progressive tax system during good years, the challenges during years where things are contracting. Markets disproportionately impact and benefit or burden the state of California. Again, capital gains playing an outsized role, as we demonstrated in that first chart. But you can see back the previous administrations, Schwarzenegger and Brown administrations, some of the challenges those administrations faced, and they moved forward. And state proved its resiliency, its capacity for renewal, and we worked through those issues. And today we're doing more than ever for more people than we have ever done in terms of providing supports. And I think if there is a theory of the case we're making here today, the solutions we're about to set forth are overwhelmingly supporting existing core programs without cuts. And I say overwhelmingly, not exclusively, because I'm not naive. There are areas where core services are being impacted, but the vast majority are being protected. Existing services provided to existing people, core services, are being provided in this 2-year, are being protected in this 2-year blueprint. So let's talk about what that blueprint looks like. Simple. Getting back into balance. This is what we believe it would require, and this is what we propose to the legislature. We propose pulling down this year $4.2 billion in reserves. I'm going to get to that in a moment. $3 billion of new efficiencies. I say new because they build on the 5% efficiencies that we announced a year or two or so years ago. Reductions of $15.2 billion. We'll talk about those reductions in the context of being one-time versus ongoing. And we're talking about shifts and pauses, not dissimilar to the early action, and revenue and borrowing, which is primarily, if you're asking, MCO and net operating loss, and then some borrowing that we'll discuss as well. The 2025-26 solutions, previous slide, I'll go back. For this budget year, here's what we're proposing for budget year plus one. Draw down an additional $8.9 billion. That would be total of $13.1 billion over those two fiscal years, $3.6 billion. The efficiencies start to annualize at a higher benefit. Ongoing reductions, as I noted, for one time and ongoing considerations, expansion pauses, again, the revenue borrowing, not dissimilar to the two I just referenced. So that's the framework. Let's get into some more detail. I mentioned when I brought up the issue of reserves that the $13.1 billion is what we want to pull down, but I want to just caveat, you saw that 4.2. We want to pull that down over a 2-year period. We don't want to pull all 13.1 into the budget year. We want to do the 13.1 billion over the 2-year budget window. So 4.2 billion in the May revision for this budget year, and budget year plus one, forgive the vernacular, plus one out year. We are looking to draw down from the reserves $8.9 billion. So that's that line item. On the efficiencies, you recall the $3 billion. This is how we propose to do it. 7.95% reductions, roughly 8% reductions. That includes my office. That includes agencies, large and small, across the state of California. We believe that kind of belt tightening would allow us to enjoy not just $2 billion of budget year savings, but ongoing savings, as you can see, annualizing about $2.7 billion. It means sweeping, and this is a familiar number, a numeric, $762.5 million. I announced that in January, works out to about 10,000 sweeping, plus or minus 10,000 vacant positions. Those positions are being determined in real time at every agency and department. They're making that determination. We don't have the list of every single vacant position for you today. That's a process that will unfold over the course of a very short period of time. It's a process that is unfolding as well in real time in terms of the work that's being done at the agency and department levels. So we want a leaner government, streamlined government. We want to do what all of you are doing in your personal lives, all the businesses out there are doing in their professional lives as well. And we think we can do that and still achieve outstanding outcomes. I'll give you an example just yesterday with generative AI. That is not a job killer. In fact, that's explicit in our executive order as it relates to artificial intelligence, but some of the new programming we're doing in partnership with Anthropic and Google and others, and OpenAI, as it relates to traffic management, as it relates to issues around, access to languages and other services. So that's a component part of our leaner government and our more efficient government and the flexibility, providing choice, meeting people where they are, giving customers, meaning giving taxpayers a voice in terms of their needs and government's services. Back to the reductions. And we have our two experts here. They'll go through these in much more detail because there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of actions that we are taking. There's not just one or two. And we can spend, and I'm known to spend a lot of time up here, but I don't think you want to spend that much time with me up here. So I'm just going to give you some broad strokes, and our experts here that up on stage can walk through in more detail, but you deserve at least a broad strokes understanding of the one-time versus ongoing, which is represented again here in the budget year. In the budget year plus one, this is the additional one-time and ongoing savings. But let's break this down so you can take a look and understand a little bit more of what these things may include, what they do include in terms of the proposals that we are offering the legislature. You see the one-time on the left, you'll see the ongoing on the right. The one-time are familiar. And a lot of those one-time we are considering in the context of how they work into other programs that we provide, existing programming and utilization rates. Always looking at utilization rates in looking at other forms and other strategies in terms of drawing down more federal dollars or looking at what's happening at the city and county level. So you'll see a mixture of very familiar issues, and some deserve more attention than others, and I imagine you'll have questions. Everyone will, certainly, on all of them, but notably on a number of them. I'll give you an example on broadband. We've been stress testing our broadband strategy in the middle mile and the last mile, and we think we've come up with a plan to actually achieve similar goals at a lower cost. So we think it's appropriate to claw back those dollars without a diminution in terms of programming and advancing the commitments that we've made. As it relates to workforce, we have $2.4 billion new resources that are coming in that we're leveraging from the federal government, disproportionate amount of that leverage from the federal government over the next 5 years, pursuant to Prop 1. We have facilities grants that we think we can incorporate into strategies for new bonds in the state. We can discuss where we are with the bonds in relationship to the legislature. I imagine that will be a question. Water storage as it relates to what is being programmed now and what we anticipate needing into the future in relationship to the old Prop 1, the $2.7 billion that was set aside for some of the water storage. Workforce, meaning these sort of apprenticeship programs, learning-aligned employment, what we're currently doing with the utilization rate, we feel we can make some adjustments. Children, youth, and behavior, this is a passion project for me, as you know. We still have $4.1+ billion in this, and we're actually streamlining that program and really targeting in 0 to 26 behavioral health initiative to the school sites with wellness centers, and we think we actually can deliver even more bang for the existing buck, as they say. On the CalWorks, there are no cuts to the CalWork. And remember, we did 2019, a 10% CalWork increase. In fact, in 2019, we did an additional 13.1 on top of the 10%. We continue the COLA on CalWorks. This is just an administrative component part. The core service remains in place. And, sweeping some bonuses under HAP. I know that may not sit well with some, but we're struggling with seeing the performance I want to see on the streets and sidewalks. And we've been clear about that. And many of you have been to a lot of events where we've expressed ourselves very clearly on this. As it relates to just some of the ongoing, I want to talk about the prison issues. We've saved, and again, everything I say can and will be scrutinized and corrected. So I'm mindful of that as I sit up here without a note. But $3.4 billion from 2021 to 2027 is projected to save $3.4 billion in terms of the 4 prisons that we've already closed and the 7 yards that we've closed. So you've got $3.4 billion of ongoing we've saved, that we'll project to save from 2021, clawing back a few years, projected through 2027. We are proposing to shut down at 13 prisons an additional 46 housing units that would reduce the census of beds by just shy of 4,600. That would produce ongoing savings on an annual basis that would grow of $80 million starting the first year it's enacted. In fact, we're also moving to pool. Chuckawalla was projected to close down, and by the way, that's one of the 4 that I referenced. It was projected to close down in March of 2025. We're looking to pull that forward as early as November of this year. So we've been scrutinizing that budget. We're mindful of the census and population. We're mindful of the direction that we're going as it relates to public safety, and we could talk more about that. But prison housing unit deactivations can happen much sooner than prison closures and provide us more flexibility. And this builds on the existing $3.4 billion that we programmed in savings on the basis of the 4 prior institutions that have closed in those 7 larger yards. It does not mean, you ask me later, legislative leaders have asked me, are you interested, are we considering collectively reducing the larger footprint with prisons in the state? The answer is yes, we are, but we want to do it in a pragmatic and thoughtful way. We want to be mindful of labor concerns, community concerns. We want to be mindful of trends, and we want to be mindful of the unknown, meaning there are proposals to roll back some of our criminal justice reforms that could have a significant impact on census and population. There are lawsuits, there are initiatives that could have impacts on costs. All of those need to be factored in, but we are moving, and we're moving quickly to focus on addressing that issue. The middle class scholarship, that's, again, the perfect proof point of something that I enthusiastically supported back when I was lieutenant governor. And I think it was John Perez and others that worked with Governor Brown to initiate the program with $117 million in the first year. We're basically leveling setting back to where it was. It's about $100 million, was 117, but that's the haircut of the enhancements that we've made the last few years, not because we enthusiastically want to do that, quite the contrary. So those that express disappointment in that, let me add my voice to that. Maybe I'll provide you a quote in relation to it. It's, again, reality. It's math. Being mature about the challenge, the problem statement, it's aligning that expectation. What are the core services that we can maintain and continue to enhance versus the things that we'd like to do that are important? That's certainly one of them that right now we feel we're unable to do. So that's just a broad strokes on that. I talked about pauses and some of the issues that we're just delaying. Perfect example of this is a program that's proposed to go in effect and this is a good example. A program that's not in effect yet. So it's not a cut to an existing service that's being provided. It's a program that's proposed, great program, that goes into effect in October of 2025. And we want to delay it 2 years. If the resources present themselves, this would be a top priority to put back in, and we would encourage the legislature to consider that as they consider this proposal itself. The child care expansion's more difficult, isn't it? I'll take a backseat to no administration in terms of our advocacy in this space. And this was a difficult one. The trade-off here was $724 million. And that's represented in the 2-year contract of providing our providers more support. The question was, do we look to cut that commitment and reduce wages? Or do we just sort of hold the line on where we are with the expansion for the time being? I thought it was right to fulfill our commitment to those providers. I think they deserve that raise. What we're trying to do is stabilize this workforce, professionalize this workforce. We've unionized this workforce. We're the first state in the nation to do that, and I was proud to promote that, not just receive that on the back end as someone else's proposal. I'm working with the Women's Caucus, who's next level in terms of their support of this expansion. So the goal is ultimately 200,000. I'm mindful of my sell-by date as governor. I'm still committed to getting there, but right now we feel like we, again, don't want to cut programs, just want to hold the line, but we still want to provide more line support for our line workers. So that was just being transparent about our considerations as we balance the child care space. We talk about shifts, a lot of movement. There's no material cuts to the climate agenda. There was a lot of creativity in moving into the cap and trade program, the greenhouse gas fund. And so you'll see some of those shifts in there. Transit budget substantially is whole. I think it's about $150 million a shift from a $4 billion base, but substantially whole. And clean energy programs, ZEP programs accordingly. And you can see that represented in that $4 billion in the cap and trade fund. And by the way, we just promoted the anniversary of the cap and trade auctions, not the cap and trade program, which was established well before the first auction. It's been 10 years. $28 billion, $11 billion has already been invested, 76% of that in low-income communities, 76% of that in low-income communities. And so this cap and trade program continues to be rightfully envy of programs around the world, not just across the country. As it relates to other shifts, you'll see some creativity here. Let me just briefly go through a few. Again, the team here could go into detail for you. Prop 56 backfill, we want the MCO to address that. The issue around ARPA, there was this is the dollars that came from the feds. There was interest attached to that. We can sweep that interest and we can shift that off the general fund. Moving the capital annex and the work that's being done there, we can move that to bonds. We were proposing to do that in the beginning. We worked with the legislature. We were in a position we didn't have to. Now we're going back to some of the original proposals. And the cannabis fund is looking again, the set aside in the cannabis fund, child care dollars that would have been absorbed under the general fund. Now we're pulling in the cannabis fund as an example. And then there's a PG&E settlement that inured to the benefit of the state. And we are borrowing those dollars, $78 million, significant but modest considering the totality of some of the work we're doing. So those are just examples for you. Again, remember the slide I showed you before, hundreds and hundreds of other examples, programs that we're proposing to make change. So the question is, well, all right, there's some examples of what you're proposing to delay or deny for the moment. What are you saving? Well, just things that were on the, part of the conversation, I should say. I don't want to say they were on the chopping block because I don't think they never got there. But they were presented as proposals. SSI, SSP, states program is SSP. It's a relationship to the SSI. We want to maintain that support. As I noted, the CalWorks as it relates to the COLAs, wanted to hold the line. Earned income tax credit, I think it's one of the great anti-poverty programs in this nation, the state. I was an advocate as mayor of San Francisco. I was one of the first cities to do an earned income tax credit advocate. As lieutenant governor, we went from $400 million on the earned EITC to over $1.3 billion. We added the $1,000 child tax credits. We added a foster youth tax credit. We want to hold the line, maintain those credits because we think they're important. We also want to maintain our healthcare expansion across the board, regardless of ability to pay, regardless of pre-existing conditions, and your immigration status. And I just think that's foundational. It's something I believe in. It's the core of, I think, who we are as a state, and we should be as a nation. Care Court, new pathway, new strategy, moving away from the old binaries, unsupported, not substituted care, we think is important as it relates to the issue of our time, and that's addressing the streets and sidewalks. And then on broader nutrition programs. We're holding our summer EBT programs. We're holding all our food bank programs. We're holding our programs that relates to some of our creative $35 million senior programs where there's a lot of sort of flexibility in where those dollars can go. So I just want folks to know that. And I want to thank Senator Skinner for making sure we were sensitive on the nutrition. I want to thank Senator Eggman and Umberg for sensitivity on the Care Court. And I want to thank, leadership, remarkable leadership of the Latino Caucus on the healthcare expansion. I want to thank Arambula and obviously great work Mary Elena Durazo has done for decades as an advocate and now as someone who's been delivering on that promotion and promise. So just examples of things we are keeping. Again, back to this notion, keeping core services intact for those that are existing beneficiaries of services. Vast majority, not all cases, is that achieved with the proposal we're setting forth. Question we're getting a lot, Prop 98, what does January look like, or rather what does May look like in relationship to January? Our per pupil in January, we announced a familiar slide, 17,653. Here's the May per pupil. It's slightly down, about $151, looks like. Making sure the numbers slides align with what is in my head. And then all funds is slightly up, which is encouraging. So Prop 98 per pupil in May, $17,502. And you'll see all funds slightly higher. Local reasons that's the case, $23,940. Begs then the COLA question, doesn't it? COLA was at 0.76 in January. Interestingly, because I don't know how else to, I think it's a word that is appropriate in this case, it went up to 1.07. Only the people that study physics and mathematics and engineering could possibly explain the Prop 98 formula to explain exactly why the COLA went up, but it has. We also driving down, as you recall, and that was in the January budget, $8.4 billion on that stabilization count within the 98 framework. So that remains consistent from the January proposal. Two things I'll close with. We want to address this issue of volatility, and as I began, homeowner insurance preview, because if you're not going to ask the question, you should have, because it's a real issue and it's top of mind for all of us. And I just wanted to update folks on our thinking on it and where I think we are as a state. But the issue of revenue volatility, this is the second to last slide. We are mindful on the basis of our experience with, again, the supercharged capital gains, $349 billion, 2021, the 2022 numbers, the volatility, that we know what we know, but we don't know what we don't know. And this is why I believe we need to have a 2-year mindset going forward. I think the new normal should be budget plus budget year one. That's a deeper conversation. We're starting to socialize that with the legislature and how we can advance that. I think it's the only way with a progressive tax structure that you can prudently manage moving forward. And I think the last few years have really underscored that. As it relates to that volatility, we're looking at the constraints under Prop 2. And I reminded you, I think you've got to reform the Prop 2. Legislature believes that as well. The question is, what does it look like? But the deeper question is, will the public support it? I mentioned to you in January, we've done a lot of outreach on that. We've done some research on that, and the public doesn't necessarily see that right now, as reform is one of their top agenda items. So that's going to take some work to, I don't want to say educate because that's patronizing. We're always getting educated, and I think that's enlivening. But to really express our point of view in a way that sort of saturates in a state larger than 21 state populations combined. In the interim, I don't want to wait. And that's why we want to move forward with this new strategy that our two experts here will discuss. And that's to address, again, this volatility, this incredible, the incredible acuity that is represented in this volatility by establishing a new budget account in the state. That would capture this excess revenue and allow us, on the basis of historic trends, to set it aside until it materializes, as opposed to assuming it's coming in on the basis of the LAO and the finance and experts saying we believe it will come in, and then we appropriate and attach appropriation to it, only to discover it didn't come in, a la what occurred in the last 2 fiscal years. So the idea would be able to create that account. Yes, there are GAN questions. A lot of questions, and we're working through those questions. But it's something I'm very excited about. I'm very grateful for Erica and for Joe's leadership in this space, and I'm very grateful to legislative leaders for their willingness to engage in this conversation. So not much more I can say on that, except to say we've had some preliminary conversations. Intellectually, people get it. There's some legal questions we have to address, but we think it's an interesting interim solution until we address the larger solution as it relates to Prop 2 and some of the questions around the GAN limit. And remember, GAN was created before Prop 2, and we're just stacking all of these things. That's why dubious a lot of these constitutional questions that go on the ballot, locking in this, locking out that. We have to be very careful about all that. And forgive me, that's a rabbit hole we can go down. It's one that's being adjudicated across the way at the Supreme Court. As it relates to this issue of homeowner insurance, final slide. We did an executive order, as you recall, about a year ago. And we're trying to reconcile 30 years where there hasn't been much reform in this space. We're mindful of voter-approved constraints. We're mindful of the challenge and burdens that have been placed on our FAIR plan, which is our backup plan, and we're deeply mindful of the day-to-day travails of trying to reconcile these screaming headlines and the reality when you get a notice that your insurer may not want to reinsure or extend that insurance, or you buy a new home and you can't even get that insurance. So this is real, and it's being felt across the United States. And I have a chart. If you're interested, you may want to ask me. You could take a look at the costs of homeowner insurance nationally and in places like Florida and elsewhere. I mean, for all our challenges, let's just not have theirs. And so we need to get ahead of it. And I know our insurance commissioner, we're in constant contact. His team is working their tails off. I know how concerned the legislature is on this. But we're going to do some trailer bill language with this budget, because the most important thing we need to do now, in addition to all the other things that we laid out in the executive order, all the other things that the insurance commissioner has already announced he wants to do. But December, I don't think we have that much time. We've got to move this. And I know 30 years and they're getting it done in just a matter of, relatively speaking, months. But we just got to do more. And he needs to have all the support and resources to do that. But we need to get this rate ruling process done. And that's why we want to expedite it over a 60-day period. We need to stabilize this market. We need to send the right signals. We need to move. And insurance commissioner, again, knows that. I know it's broadly shared. It's the how, it's hard business. We share the same goal, but we need to do more. And so that's just something I wanted to highlight before we end the presentation and move to the final point, which I guess I lied. There were 3 slides. Not 2, because, I'm proud of this. Back to resiliency. I think there's a thematic here. The normalization, the alignment, the expectation alignment as well. But the fact remains that we remain the fifth largest economy in the world, 7 years running, $3.89 trillion. Germany, $4.4 trillion. Japan, 4.2. Watch India. I want to say we remain the fifth for as long as I can because India is moving. But we don't begrudge other people's success, quite the contrary. But we maintain our success and our stature as the fifth largest economy in the world, despite all of the macroeconomic swings and challenges. And I just wanted to highlight that. I also want to highlight the record tourism, $150+ billion. Not every part of the state is enjoying pre-pandemic levels. Bay Area is still trailing a little bit. Other parts are enjoying record-breaking tourism. That's a very encouraging sign as well in terms of California's stability, but it's record high in terms of the tourism spend. And population's increasing. And I'd say that just it's time to update the memos. It's update the talking points. It's time to update the doom loop on some of the networks on that issue. That includes one of the platforms, Social Truth or Truth, whatever it is, that former president started. So I want to get him to update that talking point as well, just for the purpose of the truth imbued in the platform Truth Social. So those are three things I wanted to highlight, and that's the resiliency of roughly 40 million Americans strong. It's the resiliency of a dream that was promoted and is realized every single day in the state of California. And that's because of the entrepreneurial spirit where people put everything on the line for riches and new beginnings. That's the spirit that defines the best of California. That entrepreneurial energy, that innovative energy that continues to be the envy of the world. People visiting here from around the globe saying, what is it? What is it about this state where you continue to punch above your weight? You continue to invent the future. You continue to outperform expectations. And that's highlighted in AI. It's highlighted in immunology. It's highlighted in quantum. It's highlighted across the spectrum of biotherapeutics and innovation, medical devices. It's defined by our partnerships with universities, the research and development, but it's also defined by the fact that we get first-round job choices around the rest of the world. People come in from all around the globe because they feel seen and they feel included. And that's the final point I'll make before the Q&A. Our values continue to allow us to thrive. And those values, I believe, are foundationally intact, despite some tough choices that we are making and proposing to make in this budget, and despite this short-term adjustment. But if we move along the blueprint we're putting forward, we'll be back where we need to be, and that is back in the black. We'll be back on our feet as it relates to this budget, and we'll continue to do nation-leading work across the spectrum, and that requires partnership. And so, as I always do in this presentation, I look forward to working with our speaker, look forward to working with the pro tem. Our working relationship has been next level. I'm blessed by their partnership. The early actions, a demonstrable example of that. The relationships are sound. These are tough days, however, and I'm not naive. A lot of people have a lot of opinions, different opinions, and I welcome that. And I want to just repeat what I said in the outset. I look forward to working to adjust, to reconsider, to recalibrate. This is not etched in stone. This is not, this is not an Archimedes moment where we put the staff in the sand, immovable. But directionally, budget year +1. We have to be mindful not just of the short-term challenge, but we've got to address this ongoing issue. And to me, that's an important line that I believe we are aligned on, but I want to maintain as we move forward in this budget negotiation. So that's the May revise, and we're here to answer any questions.
Mr. Governor, it's Eitan Wallace from Nexstar news stations across California. Thanks for taking the time. First question right off the top. I'm trying to think about the average Californian out there. Right off the top, I know you were very clear in the January presentation about the following. No new taxes. Can you look all the cameras in the eye right now and guarantee no new taxes between now and next year?
There are no new taxes. I've not been one of those promoting taxes. I've been opposing taxes quite publicly. The last proposition was on the ballot. I invested millions of dollars in ads to try to defeat that tax increase. We can achieve all of this. We can get back on our fiscal sound footing without cutting core services, without an additional tax increase. And I don't think that now is the time, particularly with the stacking of stress over the course of the last few years with costs that have risen as a consequence of supply chain disruptions, as a cost of inflation, to impose any additional burdens on the taxpayers along those lines.
Thank you very much. And the second question here is for our viewers from San Diego through Bakersfield, San Francisco, and all the way north to Wairika, everyone in between. Got to ask in the sense of in previous budget presentations, I remember you talking extensively about climate, homelessness, fire protection, a lot of key issues. I know you mentioned the HAP funding in this, but just in the sense of the average Californian, a lot of numbers here, a lot of different things, just to them on homelessness, on climate, fire, crime, education, what does this budget mean to them?
We're holding the line on unprecedented investments in crime, retail theft. You're seeing progress in Bakersfield. You saw the CHP operations in Bakersfield produce 211 arrests, 127 stolen vehicles that were recovered just in the first week of operation with the CHP. Today, the CHP is graduating 106 cadets. 1,000 new CHP officers were funded, a multi-year commitment in the budget. We're maintaining that. Partnerships in Oakland. You've seen the reduction in crime in Oakland, about 33%. In first quarter of this year, you saw the reductions that continue in San Francisco. Property crime reductions in San Francisco, 32%, 14% decline in violent crime. Partnerships that we want to continue to advance. National Guard partnerships on the border, addressing fentanyl. We want to continue to advance those partnerships. On the issues of homelessness and housing, we actually are increasing our low-income housing tax credit by $500 million in this budget. I could have had a separate presentation to continue our work in that space, to continue to partner with cities and counties. You may have seen our latest stance as it relates to one community, Half Moon Bay, on housing. We mean business. We mean business about the housing element. We mean business about meeting your state mandated goals. We want cities and counties to follow the law. We'll continue in that space. Prop 1 on Tuesday, this goes to the issue of homelessness. We're going to be announcing in detail what we're doing very differently as it relates to the implementation and the reforms as it relates to mental health and homelessness. And I'm really encouraging you to tune in or participate in that discussion as well. We've been working for months now in anticipation of it passing, weeks since its passage, to fulfill our promises that were made in that campaign. So across the spectrum of those top priorities in the state, we preserve our frame of focus. No fundamental cuts in terms of the energy and daring of sorts. I say daring because we're daring to do things radically differently in those space. But yes, there are programs that are component parts. You referenced the bonuses under HAP. There are other component parts of our housing strategy where we are making adjustments, but the core mission remains firm and our commitment foundational.
Hi, Lindsay Holden with Sacramento Bee. Following Eitan's question, I have to push back a little bit when you say you can do everything, because
just for the record, I don't recall ever saying I can do everything.
Let me finish.
I want to clarify.
Yeah, let me finish my question.
Okay.
Which is, some of these cuts fall on the poorest Californians, while budget watchers have suggested changing the state's corporate tax rate. Why not consider something like that when some of these cuts will hurt Californians who have the least?
Well, I think we protect the vast majority of core services for existing programs in this state. We've done nation-leading work to expand those programs in the last few years, and we're preserving that. A perfect proof point of that is a full suite under the Medi-Cal system that's been expanded like no other state in U.S. history has ever expanded. So we are maintaining that. As it relates to the 8.84% corporate tax, which is the highest, arguably, depending on how you want to analyze it, in the country, no, I'm not prepared to increase taxes. We have among the highest tax rates in the United States of America for high wage earners. We have among the highest tax wage rates, as I noted, for corporate taxes. They were made higher by Donald Trump's tax increase under the SALT deduction elimination, which I hope is eliminated by the federal government. But I feel strongly that we have to live within our means, within the framework of being more efficient and more effective, and do what a lot of other families and private businesses are doing. We're up to that task.
I also wanted to ask, you're sponsoring a bill around changing the RENA categories to include, for cities to include homeless residents in their calculations, and yet your budget continues cuts to housing programs. How are cities supposed to build more housing to help homeless people if there's not more money to do that?
Well, with respect, you'll hear more. I encourage you in particular, spend time with us on Tuesday, learn more about the details of what was just advanced and passed by the voters of the state of California under Prop 1 that provides an additional $1 billion on an annual basis to cities and counties specifically for housing to address the most vulnerable, as you categorize them as homeless. $1 billion that was otherwise not eligible under the Mental Health Services Act when it was originally conceived. That $1 billion doesn't go in effect fast enough. There's an implementation phase. We'll be updating on that. But it also includes $6.38 billion of new housing money. Unprecedented investments to deal with those that are struggling, duly diagnosed with drug or alcohol addictions, which also was not eligible under the previous Mental Health Services Act. So I beg to differ respectfully with that categorization. There's more money in the bond than ever. There's more investment in terms of ongoing funding for housing homeless than ever as a consequence of this reform, and we'll be updating you on that on Tuesday.
I just have to, with all due respect, those types of housing that Prop 1 will fund, there's a very limited number of the homeless people in California. Most of them won't apply for that kind of housing. They just don't have a place to live. What about those folks who aren't dealing with mental illness, addiction, et cetera? Well,
I'd point to the $3.75 billion that we've invested in Home Key, a program that didn't exist before we launched it and initiated it. I'd refer to your own headline in the Sacramento Bee on the success and efficacy of Project Room Key, a component part of that. I would refer to you to the B-CHIP program, $2.2 billion in behavioral health money that we have advanced. I would refer to the prior package of $15.3 billion on homelessness and housing that we've incorporated, again, homeless component parts of housing, as proof points to suggest that the totality of that frame needs to be considered.
Hi, Governor. I wanted to ask you about this proposal for a new budget account that you mentioned. Is that something that you're going to be asking the legislature to pass in the coming weeks? And could you talk a little bit more about how exactly that would work? I know you did touch on some of the details, but I wasn't totally clear on all of those.
I've got my two extraordinary experts that are eager to discuss further the details of that. Man, it doesn't need to be introduced. This is the finance chair, if you didn't know.
Yeah, Joe Stephenshall, Director of Department of Finance. So yes, it is a proposal that will be part of our May revision. We'll be proposing trail bill language and hopefully working with the legislature over the coming weeks as we finalize the budget to include it in the final budget package. Essentially, what we're trying to do here, as the governor talked about, this inherent volatility that we have in our revenue system and what we experienced, particularly over the last couple of years, when we look at our forecast and and the surpluses that are part of our forecast. Portions of those surpluses are based on revenue that's expecting to come in over the upcoming budget year. So the general idea here would be to come up with a methodology to determine a growth in the forecast that is above historical levels of growth. Typical level of growth is 5% historically. So we would figure out amounts in our forecast that are above those historical level of growth and set aside in our budget plan a portion of that money and not spend it till it actually comes in during that fiscal year, and then we would program it in the budget for the next fiscal year.
I guess why is this needed? Beyond the reserve funds that already exist, why could you not change those to just be setting aside more money into the existing reserve accounts?
So as the governor stated earlier, we are still having discussions with the legislature in terms of reforms of Prop 2 enable us to save more money into the budget stabilization account. Those are changes that have to go back to the voters. So this will not replace those efforts. This is something that we think we can do in the near term. That could be in addition, just another tool that we have to manage that volatility.
Okay. And then just a question for the governor, since he invited it at the start of this press conference. You mentioned that you do think we should reform the tax system, but how we do so is a more challenging and difficult question. What are the solutions that you personally would support in order to get to a more stable, long-term, revenue system in California?
So on a probably annual basis, I discuss my long relationship with former Senator Hertzberg, who promoted a lot of ideas in the space, California Forward and Think Long and Bergeron Institute and others that had offered strategies. And that's a broad approximation of the approach that I've long thought made sense. There have been some more detailed legislative paths that didn't go very far in the past. The senator, to his credit, asserted them. These are tough issues, and there's certain things, that continue to promote that are difficult to actually achieve, and including, by the way, getting the voters to where they need to be to reform Proposition 2, which is an enormous undertaking, and that's why we don't want to wait to achieve that goal without addressing an interim concern, and that's the idea of this account. So that's where I've long been, long promoted, and I just think the last few years underscore that the volatility, again, is unless we have other structural reforms, is going to continue to vex many subsequent administrations and legislators.
Hi, Governor. Blake Jones with Politico. I know that in this budget, kind of unusually, you are addressing these 2 years of deficits, which you haven't done before, but there are still several delays being added and, a couple of pretty massive spending deferrals that you've kind of already proposed. One is this, $8 billion education funding maneuver that would have the state basically pay back, money through 2028, 2029 when you're out of office. Also, in the early action agreement that you negotiated with the legislature, you endorsed a payroll deferral in 2025 that's over $1 billion. So, I guess my question is, with all of those additional delays and deferrals, is there still a risk that you're kicking some of the financial problems down the road?
Well, I guess there's a risk, but look, instead of 13.2, we're taking 4.2, the reserves, to sort of hold some prudence and to be a little bit more rigid and structured. We are addressing the out year. You get 2, 3, 4 years out. I think you start, frankly, everybody gets misled because you're really speculating. It's too speculative to your question. It's the right question. But doing what we need to do this year and next year and how we balanced it, I think it's reasonable. And again, no one's going to, this is a sizable deficit. I mean, no one's suggesting nothing's occurred here and there's nothing to see. Quite the contrary. You're right to reference. It was well over $1 billion on that payroll. Those 2 examples. So we'll work through them. On 98, I want to see education cuts right now. I want to see us preserve the progress we've made on community schools, on preschool, on after school for all, summer school for all. The work we're doing. That's again nation leading in the education space. I want to maintain that. So yeah, there's that's all subject to kind of debate and discussions we're going to be having with the legislature. But this 2-year process, I think, is prudent, long overdue, and we stand ready to defend it.
The language you've used to denounce tax increases often has been that you don't want broad-based tax increases. You talked about not wanting corporate tax increases, but there have been things around the edges, such as the MCO tax expansion that you signed last month. Are there other taxes and fees that could generate more revenue and solve for this that are being considered by the legislature or others that you're comfortable with? Right
now, this what I'm comfortable with. I just presented, and we've adjudicated and considered many different alternatives. The MCO is a very different process, as you know, with CMS and waivers and partnerships and drawing down federal funds, et cetera. But no, I do not support general tax increases, period.
And you're not comfortable with any other revenue generating provisions this year?
I think we need to be more efficient. I think we need to level set and align our revenues and expenditures. We're going back to our historic revenue, more typical and historic revenue growth. And I think it would be wise to temper any enthusiasm for the more is always better frame. And that's referring to taxes.
Good morning, Governor. Travis Gilmore with the Epoch Times. There's been a lot of uncertainty about the depth of the deficit. The LAO projected $73 billion. Is the actual number we're solving today, if we take the 27.6 plus the 17.3 plus the $20 billion in solutions they said were included in the January proposal, are we solving about $65 billion?
Yeah, let's go to the, I appreciate this. And we got a slide here, we can get it up, on the LAO and the DOF, which Department of Finance projections. You can see this is the delta. I cautioned everyone, I failed miserably, not to run with that $73 million figure, but billion, but everybody, it's sort of repeated as gospel across the country. If you include the totality of January in the revision, our projected shortfall is at 44.9. Again, that's not the budget problem today, but that if you add those two up. So there is a delta between their projections and ours, and foundationally, and this there could be 25 pages, to be fair. That's where the difference lies. On different projections on revenue, different approaches to Prop 98, revenue's impact on Prop 98, how you address 98, and then just workload, which is another fancy way of saying expenditures. And SFEU is that safety account, that basically surplus account, checking account of sorts. So that's the difference. They will have, and they continue to have their point of view. We respect them. We have a great working relationship with the LAO, and we learn a lot from their insights and thoughts, and we have outstanding dialogues, and we hope they learn from finance team, which is all assembled here. Job well done, everybody, by the way. Thank you. Joe in particular and Erica, we appreciate all your hard work on this. So that relationship is outstanding, but this is the difference, and we never anticipated that number to be accurate, and our numbers suggest something radically differently.
And then can we explain to Californians how we moved from a $100 billion surplus to such a significant deficit in just a matter of a few years?
Well, it's, we can explain it. $349 billion of unprecedented capital gains, 11.6%, when traditional capital gains is around 5.18% on average. It's almost double. So you had massive volatility. You have requirements under Prop 2, the GAN. You have requirements under Prop 98, which require that set aside. We use 93% of our surplus, which is, I want to be careful, either on the higher end or without precedent for one-time purposes. So we anticipated, because we didn't want that surplus to go to ongoing commitments, we anticipated that shortfall. What we didn't anticipate is these rain bombs in December, January, February, and March, these atmospheric rivers that led to a federal declaration that led to FEMA and the IRS moving in a direction where we couldn't collect our taxes until, I believe, November 16th, as opposed to April 15th. And so therein lied this blackout period that beguiled all of us, the LAO, finance, economists, experts. And interestingly, has been at the White House recently, had an impact in terms of the IRS collections as well with their estimates, because there were other states that had similar delays in their taxes related to weather events. If there was any indication that climate change has impacts well beyond those that are often promoted, I would consider our financial delays as just another example of why we need to tackle them. Another reason I'm looking forward to conversations that we'll be having next week in this space.
Thank you, Governor.
Thank you.
Hey, Governor. Well, I haven't talked in a while. Angela Hart, KFF Health News. Thank you. I have a recently the state auditor found that California wasn't doing a great job on tracking its homelessness spending, and this isn't a gotcha question. You're doing more than any other governor in the country, really, to address this crisis. So I have a two-parter for you. Do you acknowledge, Governor, is your administration doing enough to determine whether the money that's being plowed into homelessness is being well spent? And do you worry? I'm curious. Do you worry that the appetite is souring among the public for spending more, given the lack of progress that's happening?
No, I appreciate the question and the frame. It's the right question. It's one I ask myself all the time. As you know from the audit, one of the vexing issues that was highlighted in the audit was local appropriations, local data collection, and it's difficult at the state level. I say it often: localism is determinative, and each city and county has different strategies and approaches. We've tried to level set that. To your subsequent question about doing enough, as you know, a few years ago, we required accountability plans before we submitted at least one of the discretionary portions, the HAP program, to cities and counties and CACs. I rejected the first plans because I didn't think there was enough transparency and accountability and ambition. We supported the last plans. I also acknowledge that we need to do more, not just in the homeless bucket, but also the mental health / homelessness bucket. That's why Proposition 1 had subsequent reforms as it relates to requirement by July of 2026 to have one single plan for all funding sources for mental health at the local level, with more transparency, auditing, and oversight, again, of local spend. So that audit didn't surprise me in the least, quite the contrary. Also, third, and this is really important, Angela, you know this well, but for others perhaps don't, we also promoted, and I couldn't be more proud of Member Ward introducing just a few days ago, the proposal to take the framework of our housing accountability unit, which, by the way, has unlocked 23,000 housing units in the state. I'm really proud of their work. And to connect a homeless component into that accountability framework, which I think is deeply in the spirit and the zeitgeist of what the audit was at least showcasing. And so that's another tool we hope we are able to have if the legislature embraces it in the next few weeks.
I'm sorry, Governor, I didn't hear responses to either of those questions about whether this is state money ultimately. I understand it goes to the counties, but do you acknowledge whether the money that the state isn't doing enough to ensure that the money is being well spent? I also didn't hear a response to whether you think that there's any, I mean, is the public appetite, do you think, I'm hearing this, like souring towards putting more money into the crisis? I didn't hear responses to either of those.
Well, and forgive me, I'll if I appear to repeat the first response. So the audit did not surprise me. The state has advanced unprecedented investments, you're correct, and unprecedented interventions demanding more accountability with state money at the local level. That's why we created a framework for the first state plan under the HAP money. The fact that I rejected it in many ways is implicit in response to the question. I rejected it for a reason around the issue of lack of accountability in terms of ambition and in terms of what was presented in that first plan. The fact that we're creating a housing accountability unit or created one and we want to incorporate homelessness into that also is implicit in response to your question about the need to do more around state money. And the other work we did with Proposition 1 to foundationally reform an existing stream of funding to provide more transparency and state oversight of the local spend, again, is a third, I think, reinforcement of my acknowledgement about the need to see more accountability and why I agreed, as I said, with many of the recommendations and was not surprised, as I noted, with the audit itself. As it relates to the public mood, no question. More is not always better. People want, they want to see results. I've been very crystal clear about that. I've been focused, as you know, particularly on the results we want to see on the streets and sidewalks and tents and the issues around encampments. That's why those encampment resolution grants we think are a national model. Also been very insistent that we need to move some barriers in terms of engagement as it relates to accountability and results at the local level, as it relates to the grants passed and the amicus brief we filed with the United States Supreme Court. So all of those are demonstrable responses, not rhetorical, but demonstrable responses to both components of your question.
Thank you. That was that was extremely thorough. Thank you. My second question, Governor, I think it's only been 2 years, not even quite, since you passed a historic funding increase for California's extremely underfunded public health system. $300 million ongoing. It looks to me that this is completely being wiped out in your budget proposal. Meanwhile, I mean, as you well know, climate change is upon the threats, the public health threats that come with climate change are enormous. Where there's a really big concern right now about bird flu and dairy supply. I mean, it's really I guess my question for you is, what do you say to people, to the public who worries that defunding public health at this critical juncture further opens up California to, and really the globe, to public health and pandemic threats, which, the pandemic has additional financial disasters, which in some ways put us where we are today?
Yeah, look, we have a shortfall. We have to be sober about the reality, what our priorities are, unprecedented expansions in terms of the Medicaid system here in the state of California under Medi-Cal, unprecedented investments in the health and human services space, unprecedented. We have no peers as it relates to the investments we've made. This is a program that we wish we could continue to absorb and afford. Obviously, we'll have the opportunity to discuss this with the members of the legislature and make a determination before it lands on my desk whether or not that program or other programs should be considered in relationship to the need to balance not just this year's budget, but next year's budget as well.
Hi, Governor. Kayla Mueller with CBS News here in Sacramento. How will you measure success for this model of budget year plus one? You mentioned earlier that this could become the new normal. So what does success look like to you that it will indeed become the new normal?
Well, I think it should. That's the way I'm promoting a different paradigm of consideration and thinking. We'll see where it lands with the legislature. We've had some really good conversations, though, with key staff, and we're encouraged by their willingness to express a willingness to engage in this. And I think under the circumstances of the last few years, there's ample evidence as to the why. So I'm hopeful that we could do that. In my previous roles and executive positions, we've adopted similar strategies. We've codified that in statute to the extent this is an effective relationship in terms of our thinking and with the legislature. That may be a consideration in the future. I'm not promoting that at the moment, but that's my mindset, and it's a mindset that I expect, subject to external circumstances, but I would expect to continue to adopt in my remaining three sessions. That said, it's hard to look beyond budget year plus one, as I noted earlier, because of so much volatility and uncertainty. But I do think it's important that we have a medium-term mindset. We have multi-year budgets, as you know, with projections, which are also important, that didn't exist in the past. Those provide you some understanding of what to anticipate in the future, but it's very difficult on the basis of the macroeconomics.
And in this revision, programs are being put on pause. So how are you going to ensure that they will indeed resume and that not year after year that they're getting forgotten about?
Well, you can go to, I think it's on the 8 pages that we provided you, and I'm making this up, but if I'm right, there'll be another one of those salads from January. That on the bottom of page 9, I think there's a headline that says triggers, and it's the top of page 10. And there are, I think, 7 specific trigger items that are bulleted. And they're triggers as it relates to things we've worked with the legislature formally to prioritize. If and when the money comes, we would prioritize these things first. And that's a similar process that will unfold, I imagine, based on past with the legislature as it relates to these delays. What are our top priorities if and when the resources avail themselves? And so we'll have that similar mindset. It's been a proposition that we've advanced in the past, It's more difficult when you're looking at the 2-year to assign the moment within that budget frame. But that's the approach I would take, to rebuild some of these programs that by definition we all supported. Again, these are budgets I signed. What is out here? Every question you're asking is spot on. Why this? Well, because we have a math problem. Is this what I want to do? No. But the alternative, we can eliminate our expansion of healthcare. We can eliminate wages. We can do furloughs. We can do layoffs. We can do a lot of things. I don't want to do those things. So these are the things that, in the absence of those other things, that are difficult to do. And so triggers provide that pathway, and those are examples of triggers in the past, and there'll be more triggers, I imagine, in the future as relates to this budget as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, Mackenzie Mays with the LA Times. There is no info about $5.25, the healthcare minimum wage, in this budget. Can you update us where those negotiations are?
I'm going to get it done. This budget will not be signed without that deal that we committed to being addressed. And I believe there's a trigger in January, and then we are working to address it in July. And Dana Williamson is the point person for this, my chief of staff, who's done an outstanding job on the budget. She's under deep duress that I've pointed her out and this issue out in relationship to her responsibility and stewardship and leadership to fulfill the core tenets of what was committed to. But that will get done before the budget's.
Can you give us a hint about what the holdup is? Like, should workers be expecting to not get that?
One of the things I've learned the hard way is talking too publicly about a process that's unfolding in real time. And so I know that that will reveal itself in very short order, as we stated it would within this fiscal year, and we maintain that status and we maintain that expectation.
How do you sort of navigate that, especially when people are talking about transparency in the Capitol right now? Why is it, what does the public, what do you owe the public, I guess, especially workers who are concerned that they're not going to get this money?
Well, it's the same posture of expression that I did in January on this when I signed the bill. You can read my signature related to the bill and the commitment that I just made to you and reinforced today that it will get done before the end of the fiscal year.
You had said you had some concerns about it then. Can you explain a little bit more?
I'm gonna say with respect, and I appreciate the work you've done on this and the articles, and I think it's really important, and I thank you for that. We've got a few weeks to land this, and I want to land it in a way that works for everybody and fulfills the commitments we made, and that's just my responsibility. And I just want to leave it at that at this moment. If I may.
I'll move on.
I appreciate
sort of.
That's all right.
Do you think this wage, industry-specific wage hikes are the way to go, and would you support a higher minimum wage for all?
Well, we have one of the highest minimum wages in the country in the state of California. I've long supported local level, not just at the state level, and sectoral bargaining is something obviously we embraced as it relates to one industry that we think was disproportionately undervalued and under-supported. But at this moment, I'm not promoting any additional ideas. I'm trying to address the acuity and enormity of the task in front of us. Nothing is on my desk or nothing that's pending in terms of a promotion in that space imminent from this administration.
Okay, and just a logistical question. Today's a little bit different than past May revises. Usually the budget doc is like hundreds of pages. Today's is less than 50. Are we expecting like a May revise part 2 to come, or is this it?
No, you get with I think everybody has all the details, the LAO and everybody, and you got hundreds of backups, and you could talk to the experts here. Talk to the printing press folks. Yeah.
Okay.
Hi, Governor. This is Adam Beam with the Associated Press. The LAO called your proposal to address the $8 billion difference in the Proposition 98 minimum guarantee. They called that bad fiscal policy. They said it would be, kicking the deficit down the road. Are you still committed to that in this budget, and why?
Clearly, and it's 8.8 now.
Well, why are you committed to doing it that way?
Well, because I want to maintain the commitments in terms of the investments we've made, which I think are incredibly important. I don't want to see thousands and thousands of pink slips go out. I don't want to see the disruption in the system. Joe and the team could talk more about some of the technical side. As I said, you need not only a PhD, but you need a physics degree and engineering degree and everything else related to Prop 98 to unpack its complexities, Adam. And I know you know enough about that over the years, but we respectfully disagree with that position.
On the slide earlier, it mentioned about a $500 million one-time cut for water storage.
Yeah.
I know that you've been a big proponent of the Delta Conveyance and Sites Reservoir. Would this cut impact either of those projects?
Nothing directly related to our number one climate resilience program, and that's the Delta Conveyance, nor to the work we're doing to fast track through the first judicial review process related to our permitting reforms sites, the first above ground off-stream storage facility in the immediate. And that money has been sitting there, but will not be drawn down for some time. So we looked at the timelines on that, so we don't see any direct impact. You can argue there's an indirect. I'm mindful of that. Also, as I noted, mindful of the old Prop 1 and the $2.7 billion and what's been set aside. I'm also mindful of what others may not be mindful of, and that's the work we're doing with the feds in this space, and also mindful of other ideas we have in relationship to sites to keep that project moving forward and to get this project done. So no, I'm very eager to see both complete, but it's the right question in relationship to sites more than it is to the Delta Conveyance, and we have some ideas that we'll be pursuing to address whatever anxiety may be there. But in the short run, we don't feel there's any real concerns.
And finally, you mentioned that you feel like this, the budget, the revenues declines and everything that we've experienced, you've characterized it as a return to normal, like historic norms, and that, what was happening previously was not normal, this crazy amount of budget surplus and infusions we had. So if that's the case, do you regret decisions made previously, spending decisions on that when we had all this money? Should we have been more prudent in saving and
93%? I mean, set aside 93%. I remember I had a slide. You remember a May revise? I said I wanted 99. You all laughed. And I said, well, if I can get anywhere near 90, I think historically, even Brown during those years, and fiscal conservative, I don't think he broke 89%. So no, we knew this was coming at him. And that's why we set aside these one-time programs that we can claw back or extend or promote from 5 years to 7 or 3 years to 5 or 1 year to 2 years. So no, we were very sober. And if you go back to those presentations, you'll see me very open about that anxiety. So no, we had tapped out on our reserves. We had a GAN issue that provided $18.1 billion of tax relief. We had $600 reliefs to people earning, under SSI, SSP. We provided a lot of support at the time people needed the money. You had the Prop 98 guarantees. You're paying down pension obligations. So you look across the panoply, and 93% feel like we were doing the best we could under that circumstance.
Hi, Governor. Sophia Bolag here from the San Francisco Chronicle. As you're well aware, student protesters across the country, including at public universities here in California, are calling for their universities to divest from companies that do business with Israel in light of the war in Gaza. What's your response to those protesters?
I don't support divestment.
What do you have a reaction to the agreement that the leadership at Sac State has made with the protesters there?
And on that, Sophia, interestingly, and this is not to deflect, I actually am going to learn more about that in a few hours, because I read one thing on this thing called Instagram, and then I was told something very different by a member of my staff, and those two things need to be squared so I can answer your question. So follow back up with us in a few hours.
Yes, would love to follow up about that. Also wanted to ask you about
Not that I'm on Instagram a lot. Someone sent that to me.
Also wanted to ask you about energy bills. There's obviously a lot of controversy with the budget that was passed last year and the flat rate hike. There's some discussions in the legislature of passing something that would change that. Is there any bill that lawmakers might send you that you would support to make changes to that policy?
I think what PUC broadly did was codify the bill that they did sign and send to me a few years ago as it relates to the flat rate. It just came down a much lower number than I think some had feared, and some had promoted, the IOUs in particular. It's along the lines of, I think, SMUD, in fact, the same exact number roughly. We're aligning with what many other states are doing all across the United States as well. And we're aligning with our values and our promotion around per unit costs of electricity to promote this transition to green energy and not to disincentivize people for moving into heat pumps and getting electric vehicles and moving to electrification broadly, including solar. So we think it was prudent under the circumstance, but it's changed. Now, as it relates to the utility costs more broadly, I want to remind everybody, if you haven't, you will see an adjustment on your bill. Tens of millions of people, at least, well, maybe I'm overstating tens of millions, but millions, will see an adjustment on the bill of $146 in April from last month, and you'll see another one, $146 adjustment in October as it relates to offsets to the utility bill that come from our nation-leading cap and trade program, cause and effect. We're also working across the spectrum, other strategies as it relates to addressing the costs of utilities. And so I'm mindful of that issue. I was going to spend more time on that today. I was getting a little off topic with the May revise, but I assure you we'll be talking a lot more about this issue like we will homeowner insurance as well, mindful of the anxiety that people are feeling.
So if lawmakers were to send you a bill, are you saying you would or would not be an automatic veto on changes?
You know me. I'm going to read a bill. I don't want to say I'm going to sign anything. I need to see what they're talking about. They send me a bill as it relates to this issue a couple years ago. I did sign it, and we advanced it. So if they have some new ideas or want to undo the old one, I'll pay attention as I do to how many bills this year? Just 2,000 other bills. And it's not a knock. It's not a cheap shot. I look forward to reviewing as many bills that appear to be progressing as possible, just not big tax increases.
Hi, Governor. Ashley Zavala with KCRA 3. The California Supreme Court is set to make a determination on whether the Taxpayer Protection Act gets on the ballot. And amid this discussion of volatility and taxes and reform, just what, from the state's perspective, is that you find the biggest threat with this act? Should it pass? Should voters approve it?
And forgive me, but I hope you really do appreciate it. It would be, if I'm going to dodge on a hypothetical about a bill that I haven't seen in print or a bill that may be in print that I haven't reviewed in relationship to the issue of utilities, I want to be careful about actually discussing something that's in front of the Supreme Court as we speak, and be careful about expressing anything more than what was expressed by not only myself but former Governor Brown and others as it relates to the filing, which details my concern about that initiative. I will just, for broad strokes purposes, remind you of something that is not often in print, and that's the retroactivity that's separate and above from the legal question. But the retroactivity of 100 plus already approved local measures, the impact that would have would be felt and outsized and make a lot of the conversation we're having today significantly and materially different. So I caution that as part of the sort of punditry on this. I hope people really look through what that could mean. Again, separate and above from the legal questions in front of the California Supreme Court.
Okay, separate from that, and I know this question exhausts you, but I ask because I know this is the start of a give and take with the legislature.
Good.
And I don't think any of us would be surprised if one or two or a group of Democratic lawmakers came to you and said, we'd like to raise taxes on XYZ. So is it fair to say that it is an absolute non-starter for you?
Yeah, look. Again, I'm not ideological. I'm open to argument. I'm interested in evidence. But I don't see there's real evidence and need right now to increase general taxes in the state and put more burden on working folks and our competitive posture. So no, I would have laid that out if I believed that. And I did not. I do not believe we need that this year or next year. And so I will not be promoting and will not be supporting, subject to some random act of God. And having experienced a disproportionate number of those in 5 years, I add that as an asterisk.
Okay, so you will not be convinced.
Well, no. The answer is no. Okay. Yeah. I don't know how many times I can say no to the tax question.
Hi, Gavin.
But everyone thinks, anytime you do anything, you add a fee, then it's a tax. I get it. So everyone's just, I've been doing this too long. Anyway.
Hi, Governor. Andrew Oxford from Bloomberg. You mentioned wanting a trailer bill on homeowner insurance.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit more about what you want to see in there and why you want that before the insurance commissioner is complete? Is complete with the process
I want to
he's
see
working on
things.
right now?
Here's the spirit of what I want to see. We got to move this process along. Here's my humble submission, point of view. We can't wait till December. Can't. That said, I'm intimately mindful of how hard the staff is working over there, how difficult this task is. And I'm very grateful to the insurance commissioner for his willingness to engage in this process and his deliberativeness in terms of the reforms he's promoting, but it has to come sooner. So we're promoting a 60-day process of review. It should not take this long for emergency regs. I am almost of the temptation to do an additional executive order, but under the circumstance, I think working with the legislature on a trailer bill is more appropriate, but we've got to move this process along.
60-day process of review for
the reg, for the rate
regulation.
review.
For the rates. And then also, I don't have the full details in front of me, so can you talk about the Air Resources Board? Are you expecting that they will be funded to implement SB 253 on the time frame that's outlined in the law?
We'll get into that a little bit more. They should have the resources, but let me get back to you on the specifics related to CARB's relationship to that bill in terms of staffing. I think there was a big staffing request. We think they can find those resources to achieve the same goal without the magnitude of that request being fulfilled, or at least the numeric. But I'll get some more detail, but not at the level they originally wanted. We're going to have a separate conversation. It's funded in the budget. I just don't want you to come back and say it wasn't their original. They had maybe I know this is what happens when you do this for a living. There was an original proposal where I'm like, guys, this was too much of an ask. They ultimately compromised and they got the budget as the answer.
Thanks.
There you go. Not to lay the Air Resources Board out. Sorry. That was to Chair Randolph and looking in the camera.
Hi, Governor. Jamie Kennedy from Spectrum News. You talked about pausing childcare expansion slots. You also said everyone's doing it leaner at the moment, so the state government has to. But if everyone who's already at the vulnerable stage has to do it leaner, and they were expecting a childcare slot, what do you say to the families that were hoping to get into something like this?
Well, then we have more work to do, and we've been doing more than I imagined we could do 3 years ago. I mean, if the idea that we had a 200,000, I remember we called it a stretch goal a couple of years ago. Then it was 100,000. And then I said, we'll do 150. And then we went back, maybe we can achieve this 200,000. So I would tell them our resolve remains firm, but reality, check. We don't want to take away an existing slot, 119,000. We're going to protect that. And we chose, and again, the legislature may have a different point of view. They may say, well, we want to sacrifice the wage. I don't believe that's the right thing to do. But they may say we want to sacrifice the wage increase because slots become more important. I think that would be a mistake, but we may be able to find some other common strategy. Because I maintain firm in my desire to see that goal is what I would tell those families.
And with CalWorks, with the reductions you said, I believe on the administrative side of things, with more people needing more from CalWorks because more people are doing it tough, if you're putting any more strain on that, won't that also?
Not much strain. That's an administrative function at the county level. That's not a direct impact. The COLA remains firm in the budget. And I'll remind you, since I've been here, 10% in 2019. In January, we did a 13.1%. On top of that later, you saw other incremental increases, including the COLA that we're holding today. So CalWorks is not being cut in that respect. This is an administrative function at the county level.
All right, thank you. And then just lastly, state of the state, when can we expect that?
Yeah.
Why has it taken so
long? I
long?
feel like we've just finished it today. as we're going off topics. Looking forward to, it's just finding the time and the space with the legislature. And we've met with legislative leaders on 2 occasions, and we were running around with certain dates. So I'm glad you care. You're the first person.
It was so good last year.
Yeah, God bless. Yeah, thanks.
Hi, Governor. Becca Habiger with ABC 10 News. I want to circle back to the added urgency to the already urgent homeowners insurance affordability and availability crisis. I'm wondering whether you and Commissioner Lara have been speaking with insurance companies to get reassurances that if A, then B, if the state expedites the rate request approval process, if that forward-looking modeling actually gets on board sooner rather than later, then these companies will come back and write once again
yes,
fully.
Yes, and yes. That's why I'm moving forward with this trailer bill. Let's go. Let's
so you're
move
hearing
this
from
along.
them?
We've been meeting with everybody on this. Strong opinions about time to this process, time to decision making on resolving these open-ended questions around reinsurance, around guaranteeing insurance within the WUI, guaranteeing that people come back in the market, the rulemaking, all of the above, all the things that were laid out in the executive order, all the things that the insurance commissioner himself has very publicly pronounced and advanced, all the things that a lot of the insurers themselves have been promoting with, again, deep mindfulness of Prop 103, deep mindfulness of those that have consumer concerns, and maintaining that price balance, but availability price, that finding that balance. But time is important in terms of the rate decision making, and that's what we're promoting as a short-term step, and continue to promote the larger package in partnership with the insurance commissioner.
And undoubtedly, December, as you mentioned, is already an expedited process. But what would you say to the average homeowner who, all over California, I'm thinking of folks I've talked to in the foothills who say, look, I'm retired, I'm on a fixed income, I simply can't possibly live in California for much
and
longer.
I'm with them. That's why we're doing the trailer bill. I'm with them. That's why I did the executive order. I could not, I can't impress upon them more the urgency that we share together to move this process along. I'm also deeply mindful of the burdens that have been placed and the stress on the FAIR Plan, and just full disclosure, I'm a participant in the FAIR Plan in the foothills. So to those specific individuals, we share similar experiences as well.
Final question. I'm taking a page out of Eitan's book over there. As you are well aware, I'm sure yesterday rumors were swirling that this May revise could include furloughs. Obviously, that is not the case. But to the 240,000 state workers, can you state explicitly that your proposal does not include furloughs?
There are no furloughs. There are no layoffs. We're not asking for wage cuts or concessions. We are asking for 7.9% efficiencies in this budget that will impact our administration. And we are looking to sweep those vacant positions going forward, which total roughly 10,000.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, it's Laurel Rosenhall from the LA Times. I just was wondering if you could address the question of bonds. Obviously, there's proposals floating around in the legislature, and how did your own experience with Prop 1 shape your, receptiveness to any bonds that might happen this year? Do you want any?
There are 3 parallel conversations that are taking shape. You can argue 4 or 5, but 3 that are core conversations around 3 different topics: climate, issues related to housing, and schools. There are proposals and there's desire from members of the legislature to promote 1, 2, or all 3. Those conversations continue. Met with many of the caucuses over the course of the last few weeks to have more granular conversations, and continue to meet with leadership. Our teams are meeting at staff level with leadership about where we are. As you know, on the school bond in particular, there's a component part as relates to housing and general fund impacts that must be considered. The questions there, as you know, also remain around: should higher education be included or should they not? As it relates to climate, we were able to substantially protect the climate budget as was promoted in January. Plus, we've received, and this is an update from January, now $15.9 billion from the federal government. That is substantially higher than we even projected in January of additional funds that have come to enhance our largest subnational climate budget. On the issue of housing, ongoing discussions, key legislative leaders that care deeply about that space. So we're maintaining a posture of engagement. We'll make a determination. We'll look at the bond thresholds overall. We'll look at the long-term costs of those bonds as it relates to absorbing more of the general fund. And as it relates to the issue of March and the experience we had, I'm mindful that March experience is very different than a November experience. But yes, even that experience of March sobered, I think, a lot of the conversation up here about where people are. And it goes to, I think, one of the questions was asked earlier about public's appetite. The public wants to see results. They're not interested in inputs. They're not interested to talk about how much money we're spending. They want to see results. And they deserve results, and they demand results. And so when we're out there promoting these bonds, we need to be mindful of that. And that's deeply, to your question, part of the conversation we're having with legislators.
So how many of those three do you want to see on the November ballot?
I'm working with the legislature in a process to see where they are and make a determination, and we'll let you know. But we're right now working in partnership with the legislature to see where we land on these things, and I have nothing more to say at this moment.
So also related to the November ballot, but not on bonds. I mean, this next 6 weeks is kind of the season when a lot of deals get made in Sacramento to get things taken off the ballot. Are there measures that you are actively working to get taken off the ballot?
Apparently, Dana Williamson gave that up by smiling right there. That's all. I can't tell you how many hours of the day were consumed. It's a very good question, a very thoughtful question. It's very accurate that this is the season, and we are engaged in a number of advanced conversations around these initiatives, and stay tuned.
Any priority ones you really want to get off the ballot?
At peril, once again, of making the mistakes I used to make. I'm going to make new mistakes, but I don't want to make the same mistakes that I used to make of saying anything more would be imprudent at this moment.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
And that is our last question.
Well, with that, I want to say that concludes the state of the state, but now that there's interest, I may defer. But let me thank you all again for the opportunity, and let me just once again reinforce, this isn't without, these are difficult decisions. And I'm very mindful there's things we haven't discussed that will hit people hard. These deferrals mean a lot to a lot of people. There were expectations that were set over the course of the last few years, and unfortunately, we're not able to advance that on the basis of this new reality. And so I'm sensitive to that. I'm sensitive to those concerns, and it's a way of reinforcing that we look forward to engaging the legislature constructively to address these gaps, to address the concerns, to reappropriate, to reconsider, to reprioritize. Again, the vast majority of what I promoted here were things that in the past promoted as cuts, or things in the past I've promoted as investments. And so by definition, the posture is one of engagement with the legislature in terms of addressing their particular concerns. Co-equal branch of government, deep gratitude to the legislature for their patience throughout this process, and we're looking forward to the next number of weeks. Thank you all very much. And with that, the real budget presentation is about to happen.
Good afternoon again. First, would like to start by acknowledging all of the hard work that our department has done to get us to this point. I can't express enough how much work it takes to present the governor's budget and the governor's May revision to the legislature, particularly at the May revision when we have to incorporate April tax receipts. We have from the end of April until this press conference to deliver the May revision, and the hardworking folks at the Department of Finance work nonstop, day and night, to make that happen. I just can't express how much I appreciate that. To Erica Lee, the Chief deputy for budgets for the department, and the rest of the executive team, all the PPMs that here. Just want to acknowledge their work and thank them. Also would like to acknowledge and thank all of the work in partnership with the governor's office staff and the cabinet secretaries, agencies, and departments. This is obviously, from the governor's presentation, has not been an easy budget, and it's been a real team effort within the administration to get to this point. I'd like to start by adding a little bit of additional context to the governor's presentation. He did a fantastic job of outlining the proposal, why we're taking the approach that we're taking. But I just want to highlight that at this time last year, there was significant uncertainty built into our revenue forecast, as the governor mentioned, and the approach we took at May revision. And ultimately, when we came to a deal on the 2023 Budget Act with the legislature, we held on to all our reserves. We didn't take real drastic steps in either way, understanding that there was that significant uncertainty built in because of the IRS tax delay, and we wanted to wait and see, and we said at the time how things shook out for the governor's budget. We didn't know at that time that the IRS would delay the tax filing for 99% of the taxpayers in the state further through November. But now here we are at the May revision, and we have a better understanding of what happened in terms of our taxes for tax year 2022 and now 2023. And we can see that as we had at the governor's budget, we've had a little bit of softening in our revenue since the governor's budget, but not a huge swing. And we can see we still have these huge shortfalls in the out years. And given all of that, know that this is the time that we need to address those shortfalls in order to ensure that the state is able to protect the programs and services that the residents of California rely upon. And I think it goes to some of the questions on, as the governor mentioned, this cut or that cut. Obviously, these are all tough decisions. We don't want to be in this position to be here proposing cuts. As the governor mentioned, we tried to focus on protecting the core programs and services that people rely upon. But even in doing that, tough decisions had to be made. And this puts us in a place where when we are building, when the Department of Finance starts working on the budget for next year in just a matter of months, we are not facing another shortfall. This is intention here to right-size our budget so that we can then, in future budgets, work on advancing and building back up all of the efforts and programs and efforts that are underway. And I'll just highlight that point more finely. At the governor's budget, the budget year +1 negative special fund for economic uncertainty, our basically our operating reserve was negative $33.1 billion. And so that meant, and we are required to have a positive balance there when we are presenting and acting a budget. And so that meant if we had a similar budget year +1 at this time, that in a matter of months when we were heading into building next year's budget, we would be back at the drawing boards in terms of looking for solutions. And it would be tougher at that time because a lot of solutions that we are utilizing now, including cuts that are hard, would no longer be available at that point. And that is why it was important to really get back into balance, not only in the budget year, but in budget year +1. And as the governor mentioned, that is exactly what this budget does. And so in addition to having a $3.4 billion special fund for economic uncertainty balance in 24-25, which is a similar balance that we had at the Budget Act, we have flipped that negative $33.1 billion balance in 25-26 to now be a positive $650 million balance. I also note, kind of in the approach, I know there's a question about delays, deferrals, that yes, there were some that were included in the governor's budget, but the approach that we're taking at the May revision really minimizes additional delays and deferrals and really focuses on aligning expenditures with revenues and bringing the budget back into balance. As far as the 8 pages, the document overview of the budget that folks received today, and I know the question about the size versus previous versions, that the document today really reflects the approach that we're taking in the budget, where we are, this budget is about solutions to not only solve for the budget year, but the subsequent budget year. And the 8 pages highlight the major solutions that get us there. And within a matter of an hour or so, we will also be providing a detailed list of all of the solutions that are part of the May revision proposal. As the governor mentioned, there are a few hundred of them. The major ones are in the 8 pages, but there are many minor solutions, many of those reductions that we will post that list on our website. The 8 pages historically is a document that is an overview of the high-level significant issues in the budget and is never comprehensive of everything in the budget. And we are providing that document today, so it's available to the public on all of the solutions that are contained in the budget in one place in one document. So when we have the press conferences here, and the information that we present is we are presenting the information that we normally present. With the May revise, there are backup documents that are provided to the legislature, and those will be provided by the May revise deadline, which is Tuesday. So there will be some subsequent backup documentation that goes to the legislature. That information is stuff that we typically provide, and sometimes that rolls out over a number of days. So there's not a change in terms of the amount of information that's being provided or the process, and it will all be provided by the May revision date of Tuesday. No. Okay. Lastly, I just want to clear up one thing. The governor talked about the prison closures. He was dead on the amount, the savings for it, but 4 prisons closed in 8 facilities in the last few years. The behavioral health continuum infrastructure program, he mentioned the amount that was provided for the program, which is accurate, but with the solutions that we have proposed, the total amount of funding for that program is now $1.75 billion. And with that, I will open it up to questions.
Hey, excuse me. Thank you for taking our questions again. It's Angela again from KFF Health News. I had a question about, Joe, the last budget. It was approved, but because it's a federal Medicaid waiver, some of the funding streams, it hasn't actually gone through yet, I don't think. The transitional rent waiver through CalAIM, are you familiar?
Yes.
So there was a transitional rent waiver that went through the budget last year, although it's not in place yet. It was supposed to be done by the budget by this the beginning of this upcoming fiscal year. So do you know, has the state received final approval from CMS to do the transitional rent waiver? And if so, when does that start?
All I can say is there's no changes to the assumptions in our budget, and I think we're still on track. But our program budget manager over our health programs can follow up with you.
Great. Okay, great. Can I chat with you?
Hi, sorry, just a quick question. I'm Annabelle Sosa from the LA Times. I just didn't hear what you had previously said about prison, and you said $1.5 billion. I just didn't catch the last few sentences you said. If you can.
Oh, so I think the governor mentioned an amount of savings from prison closures and facilities over the last few years going out through 2027, and that amount was $3.4 billion, and which he was correct on the amount. However, the number of closures was 4 prisons with 8 facility closures.
Hi, Rachel Bluth, Politico. Can you explain what's going on with the MCO tax here? It seems like so this 6.7 billion over multiple years. Is that from the provider payment fund for the out years? And does that mean that some providers are not going to be getting those planned rate increases? Will that be backfilled later? Can you kind of get into that a little bit?
So there are 2 probably major MCO proposals. One's on the spending side, and that is correct for the rate increases that have not gone into effect yet. The budget assumes that those will not move forward. And then on for the rate increases that did go in effect in this year, those are maintained. For on the revenue side, we're also assuming increased revenues by adding Medicare revenue to the calculation, something that we can do within the existing structure. It doesn't change impact on the commercial health plans, and it's just something that we have to work with CMS to get approval for.
Gotcha. So OBGYN, specialty mental health, and primary care are still getting their planned increases that went into effect first, but the out years, which was supposed to be, emergency care, ambulances, like a bunch of all those others, none of them are happening?
They are not moving forward in the May revision budget proposal. Correct.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Hi, Adam Beam with the Associated Press. The governor mentioned something about ARPA interest being swept up. Can you explain what that is?
It's not being swept up. It's just the ARPA funds that the state had interest accrued, and we're using that interest to offset some general fund expenditures.
Do you know about how much that was?
It's around $260 million.
Okay. And the net operating loss proposal, I know in January he wanted to limit it to 80%, I think. And now,
yes, that was the.
So now the proposal is to go ahead and just suspend all of it. Is that?
Yeah. So the proposal in January is to limit it to 80% going forward. The proposal at the May revision is similar to the proposal from 2020 that had the 3-year pause. However, a couple modifications. Number one, it wouldn't begin until the 2025 tax year, so it wouldn't begin immediately, and really we look at it as beginning in the 25-26 budget. So there's a 1-year delay on when it would actually start, and we also are including a trigger that would trigger it off if our revenues performed at a level that allowed us to do so.
Okay, but is the 80% thing still take?
So this would
year?
replace the January proposal.
Okay, because I noticed it said in the document that there was $900 million in revenue for the 24-25.
Yes.
But if it didn't take effect till 25-26, I was wondering how that.
Because it would be for the 25 tax year, so half of that year begins in.
I got you. Okay, thank you.
Hi, we talked about state workforce. I just want to be very clear. There are no furloughs. There are no pay cuts. Will state bargaining units still get their agreed to cost of living adjustments in out years?
Yes, the current bargain agreements will still see their cost of living adjustments, and there are no furloughs.
Okay, so only impacts to state workforce are the 10,000 position roughly sweep. Okay, thank you.
Hi. Can you talk about the total solutions the governor's proposing? Because in the summary here, it kind of seems to divide them into 2 different charts. It has the ones from January and then the additions in this revision, but I just want the total numbers of all like the reductions, revenue, delays, et cetera. And I don't see a chart that has. It was confusing because it said in like the fact sheet had one number, then he presented like 15 billion in his presentation, and I don't understand where those numbers are coming from.
Yeah, so there are it's not simple to just tie because we're going back to building upon solutions from the governor's budget, and then we also are talking about solutions for the following fiscal year. So it's a little bit easier following fiscal year. Yeah. There's 28.4 billion of solutions for 25, 26. I think those are broken down in that sheet.
I think I see it now.
Yeah,
Sorry.
yeah, and then for the current fiscal year, I think there's a breakdown of solutions by category of what's left because we have to net out the early action, and I do have those here somewhere.
Yeah, I just want to know. I'm looking at this again. This is just for 25, 26.
Yeah,
honestly, I can't even think about that. I just want to look at just this fiscal year, like what he wants to do for this fiscal year with the solutions, and I don't see one that totals all of the reductions, et cetera, for this.
Yeah, so what's left?
Do you just add those two together, like the chart on page 6 and the chart on page 7?
Well, no, and I think that that chart there is trying to just show kind of there's the incremental may revise changes, but what is when we look at the bigger picture for the budget window through 24-25, and we take into account what was proposed at January, the early action package, and then what's being proposed now, what's left after that. And there are a number of ways to slice this, but if you look at it from that perspective, there are 2.5 billion in pauses, delays, about 3.2 billion in fund shifts, 14.7 million in reductions, and then 2.3 million in revenue borrowing.
Is that anywhere in here? Can I is there a visual of that somewhere?
I don't believe it's in the introduction there, but it's something that we could follow up and provide for you.
Okay. And then the CDCR reductions around prison. So that's new, correct? Like, because I know the governor has announced plans to close yards, prisons, et cetera. This is a new proposal in terms of like the housing changes.
Yes, that's the new proposal at the May revision.
Okay, gotcha.
Hi, still Blake with Politico. I wondered if there was anything that you all learned from the pandemic about the net operating loss suspension and, whether you saw any kind of deterrent to business growth or business retention in the state.
I mean, one thing that we heard in terms of feedback, and we tried to take into account here, was the fact that starting it in the budget year means it's impacting taxpayers for the current tax year, and decisions had already been made, and so we learned a lesson from that, and that's one of the reasons why we decided to put it off a year based on that feedback.
Gotcha, makes sense. All right, that's all. Thanks.
Hi, I'm the last question. Can you explain what the healthcare workforce reductions are? Does that mean people are going to lose their jobs, or is that like when we talk about those initiatives, is that something else?
It should not impact jobs. It is a really impacting initiatives from the huge investments that have been made in workforce in the last couple of years as we've had those surpluses. But I think as the governor alluded to, as we were making those reductions, we also are seeing a huge influx of federal funds and other funding sources for workforce needs, and so those reductions should be mitigated somewhat by other funds.
Okay, thanks.